Okay, so
Yes.
I'll just start talking. Well, everyone, thank you. Welcome to A Global Taste. If you haven't been with us before, the purpose of A Global Taste is to talk about the food, the culture, the beverages, the families, what it is like to live in another country and then come to the US and purchase real estate here. So we try to come up with our common denominator, which is the things we all love, right? That we all like to talk about. And then we try to find out a little bit about folks from those countries. This week, we are featuring Brazil. Now, how I know we're featuring Brazil is that yesterday morning, apparently Facebook was listening to me, and up on my phone popped a little ad for a little restaurant, a little Brazilian restaurant here in Cary, North Carolina, where I live. So that was my first sign that we were talking about Brazil. So naturally, I said, gosh, I should make a reservation and go to dinner there last night, which I did. And we're going to talk about that a little bit. My second sign of the day was I went to the dentist to get my teeth cleaned. And my hygienist is Tori, is from where? You guessed it, Brazil. And her mother is from Massachusetts, originally from Rio de Janeiro. So that was my second clue of the day that we were talking about Brazil. My third clue of the day, because everything has to come good that comes in threes that we would be talking about Brazil, was I went and got my mail, and what was there but a cruise ship advertisement for a trip featuring where? Brazil. I said, okay, well, it's a sign. So here we are. So we're going to talk about Brazil. So last night I had a lovely dinner and I learned some new Brazilian words and some new Brazilian foods. So we talked about, Melissa, are you advancing me there? Can you give me one
Oh,
more?
do you want me to go ahead and go to that piece before we do our
Yeah.
introductions? Okay.
So let me introduce. So we talked about Brazil. And so one of the things at dinner last night, I had on the far right, I had, and Paulo, you're going to help me with my pronunciation because I will butcher it. Melissa and I know exactly two words in Portuguese, um, but we're going to talk about the drink I had, which is a capriana. How did I do?
Caipirinha.
Okay, there we go. See,
Caipirinha.
okay, so
Oh, so
so
close.
so I was so
Close.
close. So all of our attendees. I want to tell you, if you get the opportunity, you want to have this. When they say, do you want the small or large? You go with small. Small is good. Small is plenty. These are lovely. I had the passion fruit version, which was exceptional. I enjoyed that. We also had a lovely meal, which Melissa, if you go to my next slide there, we had a lovely meal with some Brazilian favorites. We had the picanha, which is the sirloin steak. It is lovely. We had these little cheese balls that are in the middle. Strongly recommend those. Unfortunately, I could not get the pork stew that you see on the right because that's special when you only get it on Sunday. But I did learn that at the end of the meal, you get these yummy little chocolate things, little chocolate balls, and I'm going to probably mess this up too. But brigadeiro, how close am I? If you go to the
You
restaurant,
got
get
datum. That's really good.
Oh, so I had the whole meal. So thanks today to correct all of my pronunciation. We have Paulo with us. He is going to, oh my gosh, I know I've told everybody that's registered you didn't need to take notes. Y'all probably going to need to take some notes. So you might want to get a pencil and a piece of paper ready because Paulo's got some information to share with us to make your buyers that if you happen to meet someone who comes in to visit with you, he will give you some tips and tricks to help you feel very comfortable. And I've got my friend and colleague, Melissa Mormon, with me. Melissa has been working in new home sales, helping builders and developers figure out how to sell new homes as long as I have. And Melissa is going to lead us through some data and some really great information about Brazil. So, with that,
Great.
I've totally messed up the slides in order, but we'll zip right down to talking about some of the um, the demographics, some of the information, and some deeper look at some of our Brazilian buyers, so that we can help them feel comfortable and buy some new homes with us.
Great. Thank you, Tammy. Really, really appreciate the pronunciation and the homework.
I butchered it.
You always do your homework. And that's one thing we know about Tammy. She always does her homework. So I'm going to spend a little minute here on our panelists, make sure that we introduce Paulo and Tammy as well. And I think it's always good to have, a little bit of backstory. So, Paulo, you have this very unique role within Lennar, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, but I'm not sure I've encountered an executive in most of the other builders who really focus on international sales and marketing. So I just love Lennar's commitment to that and your passion around that. How did you end up in that role? How did that happen?
Well, I think I had a couple of executives in the company that were visionaries, and they understood that even though Lennar was not a company that was building outside the United States, uh, that we should be meeting those buyers in where they are in their countries and inviting them and educating them about the process of purchasing real estate in the United States. And so I received this invitation 10 years ago to create the international program for them. It has been a privilege, what a ride, and uh, and I'm looking forward to talking about this today.
Oh, yes, yes. Okay, but then we got to know more backstory, of course, because we have to know all about you. I was, of course, studying, and as I got to know you a little bit better, you like have won awards for music productions. You've been a director, a writer, probably other terms. Tell us a little bit more about that side of you.
Yes, the background is a little eclectic and different. So I graduated in music, and I came to the US in 1991. I was born in Brazil, by the way, in Rio de Janeiro. I migrated in 1991 to produce musicals for cruise lines in Miami, and I helped create a theater down there on Brickell Avenue as well, and slowly went into the recording industry and first composing for Discovery Channel. Then I became a composer for Warner Brothers. From there, that was my first platinum album as a composer, and that gave me opened some doors so I could become an arranger and music producer, and led to many other platinum and gold album awards. I was nominated for the Grammy as a producer, and then Sony Music, which was the largest record label in the world back then, invited me to be an artistic director for them, a regional artistic director responsible for Latin America. And also Latin countries in Europe, and what an honor that was. I got to work with some of the greatest stars of my generation, and slowly but surely, I began to get more and more interested in real estate. Uh, as an investor, I wanted to understand better, so I decided to get a real estate license in 2005, and which was important because it ended up being a second career that I was not envisioning back then.
It's always amazing to me, people's journey to get to where they are. And it very rarely is planned, in terms of, when you graduated, I'm sure that wasn't where you thought you might end up, but it is all about culture and people and music. And so it all, definitely ties together. So thank you for that. All right. So Tammy, we can't let you off the hook. So many of us think that we know all about you. And your history and your career, but tell us a little bit about how you got started in home building.
My story is a little different. And for anybody who does know me, I am not technical at all. I came from the muddy boots end of the business. I worked with builders and developers and had very muddy shoes and argued about where we were going to put dirt and how we were going to lay out neighborhoods and how it was all going to work out. So that's my backstory. And then I started selling websites when websites were really a web page, right? And I got a lot of, well, Missy, I'm going to tell you what, you spent $500 for that. That's the last $500 we're ever going to spend. So that is how far back that goes. And then I've been involved with new homes ever since, which I consider to be the most wonderful opportunity in the world. We get to make a difference in people's lives. These are where they rear their children, and they put little marks on the wall, and they have birthday parties, and it's the most wonderful thing that I can imagine that we could do, is be a part of everyone's life like that. And I have been very involved with the National Association of Home Builders, which is, a lot of people know me from that. This year, I found out that we have something called the Global Opportunities Board, and I got involved with those folks. So now I meet more people from all over the world who are share the same passion that I do for building homes. So I'm thrilled to be here, thrilled to be at this place. And no, Melissa, you are 100% right. Paula, you are 100% right. You just never know how it's going to turn out. You just have to be open and willing to try.
Right. And even
So
though all three of us have been in the industry for a while, we still don't know what's going to unfold for us. Who knows what our next adventures, might be. All right. Well, good. Well, good to know, thanks for sharing, y'all, about your backgrounds and what led you to where you're at. And now we're going to just quickly take a little deeper look, both at international buyers and Brazilian buyers. So while today's focus, we're kind of highlighting Brazil, a lot of these things really apply to all international buyers. And then we'll talk about international buyers in general, and then we'll kind of dip down into Brazil. You'll see us do that a few times as we go through. So just a reminder why they buy, because sometimes we can get caught up in kind of stereotypes, if you will, as to why international buyers. And by the way, international buyers may be coming from another country, but they may live domestically now, but we still consider them international buyers. So the term does kind of cover both. But why they buy could be their primary residence, their relo, secondary, tertiary residency, student housing. A lot of international buyers are sending their children or their young adults to college, and they want student housing, global job assignments, a vacation property, resi-mercial, which is a new term Tammy and I've, fallen in love with in terms of residential and commercial combined. They could be investment motivated, and that's sometimes where we tend to kind of focus. We think that's where all the motivation is, but that's just kind of one of many. Could be rental income, could just be life choice, right? These are global executives. They can live wherever they want, and they choose to live in the US. Could be remote workers. There's a lot of different motivations as to why they buy. And they are real people with real stories, right? So we do this with our US domestic based buyers as well. We kind of lump them into like they're all the same, and everybody's really unique in terms of those personas. And, so we just pulled an example, some examples from Neo of who are some of these people and what's motivating them to buy, right? And it's as varied as our domestic buyers in terms of why they are buying in the US. And when we look at a few fun facts on Brazilian buyers, of all the international US real estate purchases, 4% are from Brazil or Brazilian buyers. Of all the international buyers in Central Florida, and this is huge, 20% are Brazilian buyers. So a really huge percentage in Central Florida. And then 700 million is spent by Brazilian buyers on Florida alone, real estate last year. So it's really something that we should pay attention to. And again, we're going to talk about international buyers and, jump down into Brazilian as well. Just to give you a sense for what are the top choices for Brazilians in the US. And this was a little bit surprising, actually, when you look at the numbers, because, we just saw that huge number in Florida. But what you'll find is Brazilians are sprinkled all over the US, and it's not an even distribution. So even when we look at kind of these top 10 states, if you will, it's actually kind of little micro pockets, if you will. So for example, huge concentration in Central Florida, maybe not as much all over Florida. You might be surprised by Massachusetts and Connecticut. And what really you want to think about is we kind of call them micro clusters, for lack of a better term. I bet you Paulo has a better term he will use with us as we go forward. But it is about looking at the distribution, right? So it's not like you take all of the Brazilian buyers and they're evenly distributed across all the communities in the United States. No, they tend to cluster into specific areas. And this can be driven by companies that are relocating, companies that are attracting Brazilians for a reason or another. It can be that as people are looking to move, they like to be like people, right? And so you'll start to see these collections of clusters. And I think the important message here is, as you are working in your market, and whether it's Brazilians or it's some of the other international buyers, it's key to know what are those international buyers that are more attracted into your area. And that's kind of what our webinar series is tended to do, is to really kind of help you tease apart. So now it's time for sips and tips. And we've introduced our panelists today. And the first thing that we're going to cover is really a really great presentation that Paula is going to share with us. And it's about understanding cultural intelligence. And I love this because, again, it connects this, it makes these are humans, right? And they're from a certain culture. And the more that we can understand that, the better that we'll be able to serve that. So I'm going to turn things over to Apollo, and you just let me know when I flip to the next slide, and I'll stay in step with you.
All right, I just sent you a request for remote control as well. So,
okay, there you
wonderful. Go. And how do you flip the pages here? Just using the arrow keys, just to make sure. I don't want to mess this up. Yeah, so I think that one of the challenges that I've been seeing and perceiving over the years and over the decades, in particular, seeing how businesses trying to enter Brazil and many times failing, is for lack of cultural connectivity and adaptability. And I do believe that every time you deal with any country, if you want to do business with them, you have to understand a little bit about the cultural differences and then create ways to bridge the gap. It is a mistake to only look at language as being an obstacle to be overcome. You have to look at the cultural differences as well. And so, since we're talking about Brazil today, we're going to go into those 10 cultural value dimensions that were created to help us compare countries side by side, so we can understand through the differences, we can understand the biases and the lenses through which people see reality. And it becomes a little bit easier for us to then make that cultural translation and not only a language translation, so we can find a middle ground and be able to properly communicate with them. So there are 10 cultural value dimensions, mostly that we're going to be looking at. When this study started, there were 5, but they were expanded over the years to 10. So the first one will be identity, which is individualist versus collectivist. And then we're going to go through authority, which is low versus high power distance. We're talking about hierarchy, how people see hierarchical factors in terms of behavior. Risk, how people deal with uncertainty. Achievement, if they're more cooperative or competitive. Time is going to be a big one. In Brazil, we're going to spend some time on that. Time. Communication, if people are direct and indirect. Lifestyle, and also rules, expressiveness, and social norms. So I think we're going to go to the first slide. I still don't know how to change the slides here, so I'm going to ask you to change it for me, Melissa. Thank you. So why does it matter? And I'm usually not a big fan of bullets in presentations, but I think it is important to write this down. I think the first thing is to the way that people think. They create often this invisible but very powerful barrier in communication that we have to be able to discern before we start in our communication process. So this is all a process of decoding. It's understanding biases, and then if you are willing to invest your time and energy, and of course a little bit of money to learn those differences, it will give you a competitive advantage. You will be able to maximize business with those foreigners and different cultures. And so we're going to go to the next slide, and we're going to start diving deeper into those cultural dimensions. So we're going to start with identity. Now, what you're going to see from number 1 to number 10 is that where a US population, which is, I'm assuming is going to be the majority, the people watching this presentation, I might be incorrect here, but I'm going to use the US as a point of reference. You're going to see that Brazil is kind of in the polar opposite in many aspects. And maybe polar opposite would be the correct, but it is in terms of dimension, it will be in the opposite side of the spectrum. So, for instance, individualists versus collectivists. So, Brazil, they are more collectivistic society. If you look at China, for instance, that is highly collectivistic. So, in the scale of collectivism, Brazil is not where China is, but it's still considered a collectivistic society, while the US leans towards individualism, right? So that already creates a little bit of a difference when you are dealing with people. So I'm going to give a tip on each one of those cultural value dimensions in terms of behavior and style, so you can begin to adapt and have a better conversation. So the tip here is to build trust not just with the buyer, but with the family or group. Personal connections drive decisions here. They have to trust you, they have to know you. Do not try to be so direct and matter of fact with the Brazilian people, because you may lose them. They want to know who they are talking to first. They want to build a relationship. They want to trust you, and they want to know that you are inclusive of their family members or their sphere of people that have influence over them. They don't usually make decisions alone. They make decisions with the collective. And so it is important for you to address the family, in particular the elders, which we'll touch later. So we're going to go to the next slide, which is authority.
Oops, hang on 1 second. There we go.
So authority, again, we are on the opposite side here. You know, the Brazilians, they lean towards power distance. They have respect for hierarchy. They can be a little bit more formal in terms of title. And so titles are really important. They do matter over there. It's not something that you can discard in the conversation. They will be very mindful if they're speaking to a manager, to a director, to a vice president, to a president. It does matter for them. And senior leaders, they usually make the decisions. Now, here in the US, we have a tendency, and this is, I would say, kind of recent in the past 25 years or so, to lean more towards a low power distance. So we're talking about horizontal organizational structures. This has been kind of the ruling, in the way that we are forming new organizations here. So this more egalitarian system of format has great benefits, but if you're going to Brazil and you're doing business with them, you have to realize that they don't see the world that way. They may be in the future, but not right now. So a tip for that is show respect for titles and deference to senior decision makers, right? Acknowledge that there is a hierarchy there, and make sure to behave accordingly. The next one will be risk. Now, risk, it's also an interesting one. It's a low versus high uncertainty avoidance. How willing you're taking you are to take risks. And in this case, the US will be on the scale of risk tolerance will be one of the highest. And Brazil is not one of the lowest, but they are lower in that scale. Now, they lean towards high uncertainty avoidance. So they need a little bit of ground to make decisions. They need some due diligence. And most of all, they need to trust the relationship. Relationship, again and again and again, will be repeated, truly matters, because when they have to make decisions, they will often rely on heuristics, which is this process of cognitive bias, where when we are confronted with a difficult decision, then we will often go with what we know, and that may be that the relationship is so solid and strong that is enough to overpower any lack of knowledge that they might have on the specific subject. So you have to, use heuristics in your favor, building strong relationships with the people that you do business, in Brazil and in Latin America in general is quite relevant. Now, the US leans towards low uncertainty avoidance. They're much more comfortable with the ambiguity and experimentation. We see that in our push for sciences, and they have much higher tolerance for entrepreneurial risk as well. So the tip here is offer clarity, written guarantees, step-by-step explanations to build confidence, careful with language. Many Brazilians do speak English, but that does not mean that they are proficient, especially when you enter technical terms and in real estate businesses and transactions. The way that they do real estate in Brazil is often very different than the way that they do it in America or in Italy or in Portugal. And so you have to account for those differences. Do not assume that they understand how the system is in your country. The next slide will be achievement. So cooperative and competitive. Again, we see those two countries into different sides. Brazil, they lean towards cooperation. They like to work as teams, as groups. They like to involve family members. They like to involve friends. It's very, very common for friends to create corporations together and businesses together and family members as well. And the US tends to go towards the competitive side. Now, you can argue here that this is in particular, the economic shift that we had coming out of the Keynesian economic system that prevailed since the Great Depression in 1929, and then we moved to neoliberal economy with Milton Friedman, towards the Reagan era, and abandoning the Keynesian system and made people highly competitive, because going to neoliberalism, you are now trusting in that invisible hand and the power of competition. And the reality is that many countries still retain a lot of Keynesian economics, or the philosophy of Keynesian economics in their framework. And so sometimes, and you have to account for that. Cooperation for them is quite important. So make sure that, again, just like we were talking about, identity, which is individualistic versus collectivistic, cooperation, doing things together, coming to solutions together is quite important. So include their impressions, include their opinions, be good at asking questions, asking how they feel about things. So the tip here, is highlight how to offer benefits for both sides and foster mutual success. This is quite important. Make sure that you always let them know this will be beneficial to you because of this. And avoid overly aggressive tactics. Americans, Germans, I have here a great friend watching, Kirsten Paul, and that she's the warmest German I've ever met in my life. And we often talk about that. Germans can be very direct. It's culturally the way that they communicate. Brazilians are not. They are very indirect. So you have to account for those differences. So now we're going to talk about the most interesting difference, which would be time. Now, this might be a new term for you. It's called event time. And the way that Brazilians in particular, this is again, it's not only Brazilians, Latin cultures in general, and my Italian friends here in the audience, they understand this. The way that we perceive time is a little bit different. The US, the Germany, for instance, you lean towards absolute time. So if you tell me you have a meeting at 12:30, it is 12:30, and you gotta be, if you're 15 minutes before 12:30, you are already late, right? That kind of mentality, 12:30 sharp, you have to be there. Well, for a Brazilian, they don't perceive time in that way. They operate under something called event time, which is, it could be described as, if you tell me we have a meeting at 12:30, the ears will interpret it as in the vicinity of 12:30.
Mhm.
And there is a little bit of subjectivity applied there. In particular, if it is an event that is informal, or is a party, or it's a dinner invitation at in someone's homes, you often, if you say, hey, let's have dinner in my house and it's going to be at 7 p.m., Brazilians will purposely arrive late because they are trying to be mindful of the fact that maybe you are not fully ready at 7 p.m. Maybe you just clean the house and you're still taking a shower. So they're going to make sure that they arrive 7:15 to 7:30 because they're giving you time to finish and prepare. Well, for an American, that might be seen as something uh, a rude behavior, right? Because you might say, "Hey, we are waiting for you to have dinner." Please understand they're trying to be nice. They're not trying to be disrespectful at all. So those are little things that you have to account for. However, if they're doing business with you in the US, and since we have a different way of looking at time here, it is quite important for you to just be explicit about the importance of being on time, because then they will understand that 12:30 means 12:30, not 12:45, not 1 p.m. If you're not explicit about it, if you're not letting them know this is the time they're expected to be there because we have important things to do, and time is of the essence. If you don't make that explicit declaration and intention, you might get disappointed. But if they are late, please do not interpret that as being disrespectful because they don't see it that way. And another thing that you have to do is account for the meetings to be a little longer, because once they engage in conversation and they begin to open up, because remember, they're always trying to make a friend. That is ultimately the goal that they want to have in every meeting with everybody they do business with. Once you get to that point where the conversation is really getting warm and you're getting to know them better and people are opening up, you don't want to abruptly interrupt your meeting right there, because that step is crucial for you to doing business with them. So always account for a little bit of delay in the end of your meeting, and also to compensate for any delays that might happen at the beginning of the meeting. So just be flexible and understand it's not out of it's not disrespectful, it's just a cultural bias. It's just a cultural difference. And so we're going to go to the next one, which is communication. I already mentioned that Brazilians they lean to be more indirect in their conversation. They're highly expressive people, and super fun and nice and friendly. But they are not direct. They're not direct, especially when you're talking about conflict and negotiation. If it is something that is that could make people feel unease. And so at that point, they're going to resort to an indirect conversation. So for us, that understanding direct conversation, we just read the clues, right? We sense that the person is uncomfortable discussing the topic and so on and so forth, and we find ways to maneuver around it. But for a culture such as the US and other European cultures that are much more direct in the style of communication, this might present a challenge. So it is important to pay attention to tone and body language. You have to understand that what's coming out of their mouth is not necessarily the way they feel. They just, but don't try to force it. You just have to be tactful and nuanced in order to have, achieve your objective there. The next slide will be lifestyle. Lifestyle, being versus doing. Again, here we have a difference. The Brazilians lean towards being. Oh my gosh, it's an emphasis on enjoyment and balance, leisure, having fun, being with friends. It's the I think that probably we can sum it up with working to live or live to work, right? I think that countries like America, we kind of pretty much subscribe to the I live to work kind of mentality. We're trying to shift that right now because we understand that it has negative consequences. But it has been the mantra and the motto for a long time. Brazilians are the opposite. Opposite. They work to live. In the end, they want to have family time, and etc. So don't forget that. So let's go to the next one, which is rules. Particularists versus universalists. Again, Brazilians are particularists, exceptions are made based on relationships. this could be a little challenging because, for instance, they may even look at a contractual rule and they might expect you to carve an exception for them based on relationship. It's very common for that to happen, for them to say, no, I know that this is what we agreed on paper, but it's you and me. You got to give me an exception here, right? And so you have to understand that, again, it is something that is very common in the Brazilian culture for exceptions to be carved. So you have to be flexible sometimes because that is a gesture of goodwill that increases your friendship capital, right? Which then will improve the outcome of whatever transaction you are involved in. The next one is expressiveness, neutral versus effective. Again, we are going to different sides here. Brazilians are very effective people, very effective people. The emotions are openly expressed. They're very warm. Once they come in, they're gonna make themselves known, and they're going to talk to people, they're going to express it, and that expressiveness is something they are very proud of. They're very proud to be people like this. I challenge you, if you go to Brazil and you have an open mind, if you go to Brazil, I challenge you not to make your first friend right at the airport once you arrived, because people are so friendly and talkative and they want to know where you are. And nowadays, things might be a little different, but if you go back 20 years ago, you would be meeting strangers on the street, and on that first encounter, sometimes people will be inviting you to go to their homes to have a meal with their families. That's how open they are to relationships. They're so effective, and they're so enthusiastic about relationships. US, obviously, much more distant. It takes a long time to build trust and then go to that point where you can call a person a friend. Until then, they are acquaintances, right? For Brazilians, everyone is a friend, right? Kind of. I'm exaggerating, but kind of. And the last one is the social norms, which is tied versus rules. When I talk about contractual negotiations and exceptions, it has a little bit to do with this as well. And there is a level of informality in the way that Brazilians behave towards life that is sometimes I find it delicious, and sometimes I don't. It just depends on the context, right? Because the informality allows for barriers and masks just fall off immediately. When you're meeting a Brazilian, they are not interested in your mask and the persona that you've created and crafted over the past 40 years of your life. And when you're first introducing yourself as a businessman, they want to know who you are. So the first thing that they want to do is to get that mask and pull it out of your face, because they're coming already without a mask. They're letting you know, this is who I am. Who are you? Right? And so it is a very different style of communication, and it will require some, again, flexibility from your part to accept the fact that you have to show who you are. You have to be genuine, and you have to be transparent about your intentions and what you're trying to do. That level of honesty and transparency, it will always pay dividends in any relationship. And so stay flexible, avoid being rigid when you are with them. Relax, just relax and be a person. Try to imagine that you're already talking to a friend, a person that you've met already 4, 5, 6 times before, and you are going to probably get to that point where you're going to be in balance and with a Brazilian when you're starting to do business with them. So those will be the 10 cultural value dimensions. And I think that with this in your belt, I believe you'll be much better empowered to do business with Brazilians, either here or there.
Wow. Wow. This was really, really great. I mean, what really struck me, Paulo, as you were talking, and you were talking specifically about Brazilian culture, it's really about just as you are a good, marketing and sales professional or executive, listening and getting to know the nuances of your potential buyer, right? We know female buyers versus male buyers react very differently on these scales as well. So, and this was fascinating because I think, you know, a lot of times as Americans, we tend to think everybody thinks like we do, and that, yeah, to be super competitive is the way you should be. You know, that's success, right? And allowing for these cultural nuances is so important. And it was kind of funny. So 20 years ago, I was down in Brazil. I was in the computer technology industry, and I was trying to get with the head of a major computer company down there to do business with him. And it took me 6 trips over 2 years, late dinners, long talks before we ever got to the business side. And I finally was 8 months pregnant and I said, I can't come back for a little while. I mean, you know, and so he chuckled and we did a deal, right? Like, so I think so much of what you're saying, it's just being in tune with that. And we're so impatient because back in the US, you know, my sales pipeline, when are you going to close this guy? When are you going to close this guy? Right. And it's just a
Yeah.
different time and a different pace. So I love that. And I want to talk to your friend Kirsten from Germany because I've got a German business partner coming over here at the end of this week. And I probably could use some tips on that. So really appreciate that. You know, Tammy, I'm sure you have a ton of reflections as well about what we just heard.
Oh my gosh, I have all these notes, right? If you saw me, I've got pages of notes. So it was very interesting information, and I like the part. I see that. I think the curiosity, it goes back to Paulo, and some of our other webinars that we've done. We've talked about for salespeople, right? For the sales team and the marketing team, you know, that natural curiosity and that asking some questions and just having a conversation to understand what's important. And you and I've talked a little bit about before, and I hope it wouldn't impose too much to ask you some of the differences of what it would be like to buy a home in Brazil versus buying a home in the US, because I think that's important for all of our sales and marketing folks to understand that it's a lot different. Can you share one or two things about that?
Oh, hugely different. Let's begin with the fact that we do not have, because we are here under the umbrella of Neo, right? We are, you
Mhm.
know, either work for or we are huge fans of this international MLS system and commemorating the fact that finally we have one. Uh, Way overdue. I mean, it has been, a desire of anyone operating with international waters, and trying to have a vehicle of communication that would allow us to disseminate information to multiple countries, multiple agents at the click of a button. And now we finally have that with Neo. And uh, that we take for granted. We take for granted that we have an MLS system in the US. We take for granted that now we have an international MLS system through NEO. That's not how most countries operate. We've been seeing here, if you're reading news about it's becoming kind of a controversy, the way that Compass is trying to pre-market their units, and then Zillow is saying, "Hey, if you do that, I'm not going to let you then have those communities marketed on our website," and so on and so forth. Well, in Brazil, as in most countries, you're going to have listings that are never made public except through the website of the broker. You have brokerages that are responsible for the sales of that specific building or project, and no other brokerage will. It's like being a seller's agent, but everything has to be funneled through that brokerage at all times. And so our system here is quite different uh, because of that. And that's the importance of Neo and the importance of Neo being widely adopted in Brazil right now. So if you are entering in this moment the international business, now that you have Neo as a platform of communication, oh, your job will be so much easier than it was before. You don't have to be
Right.
knocking at doors down there, one broker at a time to formalize these relationships. You can now just communicate directly. If you are a developer, you can communicate with over 25,000 agents all over the world. And in Brazil, again, widely adopted. Another difference that I would say is, and I'm going to, in this case, talk to perhaps to home builders if there are home builders here in the conversation. It is the fact that once you're purchasing a condo, if you purchase a new home in Brazil, the home comes kind of stripped of things that are considered very basic here. There will be no cabinetry in the kitchen, in the bathrooms. You
Mm.
might have maybe a sink, and so it is very common for them that once you receive that new property, that you spend about 3 months of time and 10% to 15 or 18% of the value of the property in a renovation project, right? Where you're going to actually have to build the cabinetry custom made and get the home ready to be livable. And here in the US, we don't have that. And my company in particular that took this direction of being an everything is included approach, the buyers are Brazilian buyers are always astonished that they get the keys of their home, and if they are buying that as an investment, they can put the home on the market on the same day. If they want to live in the home, they can just bring the furniture in and they can sleep in that home in the same day. And they already have all the comforts and amenities and everything that they need already set up for them. And third and final thing that I would mention is if you are afraid of our interest rates right now and concerned about interest rates, please do remember that interest rates in most countries abroad, in particular Latin America, but specifically in Brazil, interest rates are much higher than interest rates here, and so our interest rates might be high to our standards. Uh, Historically, not, but no, based on what we've been experiencing for the past decade or so, but they are not something that would scare or an international buyer. You have to focus on part of your narrative is reminding them
Mhm.
that countries such as Brazil, that in the past 10 years, uh, the currency lost about 80% of the value against the dollar. That inflation in Brazil was twice as much as high as inflation in the United States. And so in reality, investing here, buying a home in the United States, and in particular, if you're able to finance your home here, uh, uh, the gains are monumental in comparison to just investing on their own country and their own currency. It's all about diversifying portfolio. It's all about reducing risk. And remember, they are kind of more risk averse
Right.
than Americans are. So talk about risk, talk about the power of diversification, the power of leveraging, because they can get financing here, which is something that surprises them as well. And they can get financing here. Kirsten Ball, my friend from Germany, she runs one of the most sophisticated financial institutions out of Germany, and she does that for us beautifully. And she has loan programs for nationals, any kind, and with 35% down payment, and that is enough. And then you are leveraging the value of that home, your dollar for dollar. This is so much better than just investing in the stock market, right? So the arguments are all in our favor. Once you present them in a concise way, logically, with data to back it up, numbers, don't leave anything out, present a good argument, create a nice narrative with a good flow that is intelligible, and be careful with language, make sure that you go slowly with segues from one idea to the other, but build a story, a narrative that allows them to see the benefits of investing here, and they're going to come. And the proof of that is the success that we've had here with Lenar, with our program that by all that we
Mhm.
know, it's the largest and most successful international sales program of any public uh, home builder today.
Oh, yeah, such great tips and a reminder that again, we tend to think that our buyers and prospects think like we do versus, good question, Tammy, on, what's it like to buy a house in Brazil versus the US, and just so many advantages that we kind of take for granted, right? We just kind of
We do.
assume a house is going to be finished, right, when we turn it over. Except in those COVID days, we had a few bubbles, but for the most part. So just excellent. And I could go all day long, but I know we have to kind of wrap up. What I'd love to hear from each of our panelists, and we'll start with you, Tammy, just kind of a couple top tips for builders that maybe have not really focused on the international buyers. And in this time where we've got a lot of inventory and sales are a little soft in some areas, this is a great untapped market. What would be a couple of tips for builders out there that are thinking they probably need to jump in?
I have learned so much. Paula, thank you so much. I feel so much smarter after our webinar today. But some of the things that I've learned since I've embarked on this role with Neo, and I have learned a lot. I think the number one thing that I can share with our builders and developers out there is to be curious, right? I think the being curious and asking the questions and engaging is just so important because it is this huge untapped market, which caught my eye, right? Many months ago, caught my eye, this untapped market. So my first tip is be curious. My second tip is to engage with our realtor friends out there. Paula, as you mentioned, there's the realtors out there who don't be afraid of the language, because you have a realtor who is multilingual, who will jump in and help with the transaction and help with facilitating everything. So that's a great place when you've got inventory. Those are great friends to make and to engage with. So that's my second one. And I think the last one is to just learn a little bit and show the effort, and don't be afraid to ask for the referrals, because if we circle back to the beginning, one things that you said in the beginning was you're doing business with the entire family. It's not just one person like we are here in the US. So that's a whole family. I see it as a salesperson here, right? That's a whole family of referrals out there, all the friends and families, and they'd all like to buy a new home with me. Why wouldn't they? Right. So those are my three tips. Be curious, don't be afraid, learn a little, and ask. I think I just snuck in an extra one. I think I learned that from Melissa. I snuck in number 4, ask for the referral.
Awesome. All right, Paula, what are your closing tips for our home builder friends?
I think that Tammy, or her great wisdom, just encapsulated this better than anyone. It's all about curiosity. You have to be curious. You have to allow yourself to wonder again, especially when you're dealing with other countries, because there is reason to wonder. There is a reason to be fascinated by other countries and the achievements of other countries and their history and their culture and mannerisms. I mean, it is a fascinating journey and endeavor, and you should open yourself up for that, because your life will be richer as a consequence. For home builders, because you touched that, I would say look at the cycles, real estate cycles we've had since I think 1795, when they started being measured here. And you're going to see that this is like uh, beating heart, right? And every 18 and a half years apart, we move through cycles in general. A few exceptions being what happened right now because of COVID, but normally it's this, the cycles are pretty well managed. And when you add international sales to your mix, what you're doing is that you're creating a little bit of a safety net for your business when the cycle goes down, as it did right now, when it becomes a buyer's market, because you are leveraging now economies that are going through different cycles. They're going through an upper cycle versus a down cycle, and then you can bring those economies in play. And so rather than you going all the way to the bottom, of a buyer's market cycle, in it, you can then incorporate and bring some additional incremental international sales, and then bounce away from that back to the next cycle. It is in your interest. We talk about risk and mitigating risk, and this is a way of doing so. And controlling that, or something that seems sometimes uncontrollable, which is the cycles of the business. Well, you can at least minimize the impact of a negative cycle. So it is something you should have in your portfolio of solutions. And I encourage you to dig deeper, and start looking at the outside markets, because people want to buy homes here. They want to invest here. And the matter is, are you going to be selling a home to them, or are you going to let us here sell all the homes for them? Because we'll do it gladly if you don't want to do it. But, it is always good to have a good competition around.
Of course, of course. All right. Well, with that, we're going to drop the mic because I just think this was a fabulous session. So appreciate you, Paulo. So appreciate you, Tammy, in terms of bringing this to all of our builder friends. So I'm going to let you bring us home here, Tammy, and tee us up for the next one.
Paula, this was absolutely awesome. Thank you both so much for being here on behalf of NEO. We really, really, really appreciate you all. We're so excited. I'm so excited about this opportunity that we have out there for my builder friends. So we'd like to see everybody. The next one, we will be on June the 3rd at 12 noon Eastern Standard Time. So hope to see everybody there. And if you can check my dinner reservation the night before, you'll know what country we're going to feature and what we're going to talk about. Just watch Facebook. It knows what we're thinking before we've even thought it. So thank you all for being here. And we do appreciate it and look forward to talking to everyone soon. Thank you.